Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Seek This Week. Again, every Thursday night, we hold a town hall meeting. We provide you updates on federal, state, and district educational guidance. We talk about mental health, evaluations, transition planning, community issues, and other important educational issues that are important to families of children with a disability. And we try to answer as many questions as we can. We're really excited tonight. We have special guests. We have Connecticut Education Commissioner, Dr. Miguel Cardona. Welcome. I'm Barbara DeStinti. I'm the president of SEEK, and I'm the parent of a child with a disability.
Hi, and I'm Julie Swanson. I'm the outgoing president of SEEK. I remain on the executive committee, and I am also the parent of a young man with a disability and a special education advocate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Forte. I'm a special education attorney out of Shelton. My wife and I do have a child on an IEP, and I'd like to welcome Commissioner Cardona to our weekly show.
I'm Andy Feinstein. I'm also a special ed lawyer out of Mystic, and I'm delighted to have Dr. Cardona, who has been just an unbelievable breath of fresh air in the Department of Education. He has made it accessible. He's made it open. He's talked to us. It's really a pleasure to have him with us tonight.
And I'm Jen Laviano. I'm also a special education attorney. I am on the executive committee of SEEK, and I'm the co-chair of the Attorneys Committee of COPA, which is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, a national organization. And I echo everyone else's welcome and appreciation to Dr. Cardona for being here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Our mission at SEEK, again, to advocate, educate, and legislate for the 80,000 children in special education in Connecticut. We also work on behalf of kids with 504 plans and the kids that should be identified but are not. So Jen, why don't you give us our disclaimer for the week, please?
Yes, so while several of us are attorneys, this is not intended to be legal advice. This is a platform for conversation and dialogue, and to that end, we know a lot of people post questions in the chat and send us emails, and we appreciate them. We ask you to keep in mind that this is a public forum, and anything that you post is something that could reveal your child as a child with a disability, which you may be perfectly comfortable with, but you may not, and I just ask you to remember that. We also ask people to keep their questions general. We want as many people to benefit from our conversation as possible, and if it is very, very specific to your child, it probably won't benefit everybody, so appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. All right, we're going to get right into it. We're going to get questions for Dr. Cardona. So, Commissioner, can you just come on and talk to us. Tell us what's going on.
Well, first of all, just thank you for the invitation. I know that I received an invitation a couple weeks ago, and I think it was the timing of it. It didn't allow me to be on. As you might imagine, there are different things going on, but you know, I really feel like this group has been strong partners with us. We've been able to listen to different perspectives, and I wanted to get on just to acknowledge and thank you for what you're doing and listen to the questions. To me, it's critically important to listen to what families are saying, what they're experiencing, so that it can inform the work that we do, not only as commissioner, but throughout the agency. So thank you for the invitation and for letting me be here with you tonight.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our first question. Jen, I think you have our first question.
Yes, so Commissioner Cardona, parents are asking us all of the time what the most recent update is on Connecticut schools reopening. We know we've had some guidance from the governor's office, from the task force this week, but we're all anxious to hear your perspective on that.
Sure, thank you. You know, that's a great place to start. We've been working tirelessly for the last 3 to 4 weeks on, you know, we phased from, are we going to close schools for the remainder of the year or cancel classes? So once that decision was made, we really needed to start thinking about summer and fall. And we worked with tremendous input from educators, parents. We had district leaders, special education advocates, all kind of coming together to get information to the State Department of Education team that's trying to develop plans that first and foremost keep people safe. I want to just remind, and not that you need a reminder, but what is sound educational policy, or what I've valued in education for the last 20 plus years, takes I don't want to say a backseat, but has to be run through the filter of, is this going to protect lives or is this going to endanger lives?
Right.
It's one or the other. It's not, there's no gray here. So when we develop plans, or when we think about whether it's early childhood or summer camps or summer school, we really need to make sure that educational policy is being filtered through the lens of occupational safety, and the health department and the folks that epidemiologists that know transmission, cleaning, those type of things. So we've done some work to develop a draft plan of the summer school guidance, and we're going to finalize that. We actually put out the draft only because we wanted to get things out as soon as possible, so people can start thinking about what we're thinking about. But we had to run some details through Department of Public Health and make sure that it's ready to go in a format that can be followed completely. So that should be coming out very soon. So that's going to kind of lay the foundation to what we're thinking about with regard to fall. I have to share with this group and with all the families who are listening. And first of all, I fail to just recognize, to all those that are listening, I hope you're well. I hope your children are well. I understand the major inconvenience this has been for you and your families. I speak to you as a father, right? Because I have to make decisions that my children are going to also experience, right? So they're going to be going to school, or they're going to be experiencing some form of distance learning also. So it helps to have that perspective, and keep in mind that the safety of your children and your family is critically important in everything that we're doing. So the fall planning is underway, and we're looking at different models that take into account not only educational needs, but statewide needs. So that certain models allow for families to be engaged in work more than other models. And for some of our students, being home alone is not an option. And we have to take that into account if we're going to come up with a plan. I will share that we've been working really hard to look at plans across the country from different countries. I've been in communication with commissioners from, Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, Maine, Pennsylvania, all within the last, 4 or 5 days, to make sure that we're listening to each other too, to come up with the best planning. I think we're further along than some other states in this area, in terms of planning for the fall, but we're not ready to share any definitive plans, because ultimately it's the governor's plan. So we're going to be making recommendations to the governor on what we think is best.
Great. Okay, let's move. Jeff, I think you have the next question.
Sure. So Commissioner, you answered some of my question in Jen's question here, but more specifically, to the extent that you can share insight in this for parents. Parents are wondering if the state's going to be considering a possible hybrid in-person distance learning reopening plan. And to that extent, having some students return before other students return. I mean, that can be dependent on a lot of different things. Is there any insight that you can share with our listeners and our parents about whether we're leaning more towards a hybrid model where it's both in-person and distance learning? And if we is that going to cater to having certain students return before others, whether it be by age, by grade, or by disability, perhaps?
Sure.
Thank you.
So thanks for that question, and I'm going to give the most specific I can give you with that disclaimer that Jennifer said before. This is not official guidance yet, but I get it. The parents need to know what to expect.
Yes.
I anticipate the fall reopening, including a hybrid model of some in school and some, I'm almost hesitant to call it distance learning. I want to call it blended learning. And I'll tell you why. What happened on March 17th, where teachers had to instantly turn into experts in distance learning, and I commend these teachers. I really tip my hat. No other profession had to change how they do business overnight and stay, and not to mention that they're doing it now with their own children next to them. So I commend the work that has been done. But to me, what we were able to do in the last 2 months, as impressive as it was, is analogous to that donut spare tire, right? It's good to get you from point A to point B, but when you're planning now and you have time to think about a long distance travel, you're not going to put that donut back on. You're going to put a better tire. So the new version of distance learning or blended learning needs to have some level of standards that are better, because I know the experiences for many of our learners over the last couple months is less than desirable. In many cases, students have had difficulty getting on. So I want us to almost unlearn some of the things that we've experienced and know that there's a better day coming with blended learning. And so blended learning will have to be a part of it. I mean, look at all the reports of what's happening with regard to infection rates. But I'll tell you, my goal is to have some hybrid version where we have students in the schoolhouse, but the transmission of COVID-19 over the next 3 to 4 weeks will determine more, will lead to better probability of prediction than anything else. So we could plan for it, but if the rates get worse over the summer as we start to slowly reopen, that might have to scale back a little bit, because ultimately safety is the number one.
Yeah.
To your second point, is it conceivable that there's a model of reentry that has some groups of students coming in more? Or yes, we feel there's an opportunity for us to really focus on equity and access, especially for those students who benefited less from the time in the last couple of weeks. We know students with special needs, many of them flourish with the version of hybrid distance learning they've had. But for many students, it's insufficient. The computer, they didn't access it as well as some of their classmates. So we are thinking about how we can bring students back and get them the support that they need and maintain equity and access at the core of our reopening plan, just like it's part of the core of our belief system at the State Department of Education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Andy.
Hi, Commissioner. We've had this discussion before. The state so far has been issuing guidance, but not direction. I'm concerned about the situation where District A reopens full-time in school and the neighboring district has entirely remote learning next year. Is the plan for the department or for the governor to issue some clear direction as to what school is going to look like, so every district in the state has a similar sort of educational program?
Well, you know, in Connecticut, we love one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
That was a joke, no.
Yeah.
So, you know, so the reopening team has been looking at different models. So there's AM and PM. There are, you know, and every district's capacity to receive students is different. But to your point, one thing that we've heard frequently is that variations between districts could make it more difficult for schools to reopen and to provide equity and access. And what I mean by that specifically is, if I'm a teacher in Barbara's district, but my children attend Julie's district, and Julie's schedule requires that I'm home with my kids because they're 8 and 9 years old, and my parents are no longer available to babysit because they're older or they have comorbidities, my ability to go teach in Barbara's district is limited. That's what we're hearing. So we're taking that into account. And while I can't tell you today that the plan is going to be a one way to do business, we are going to be recognizing the fact that sometimes the variation can limit the ability for students to access learning. And we have taken that into account, so your question is a good one. I think one thing we're also hearing is that the elementary age, the students there have had the most difficult, in general, have had the most difficulty with remote learning being the primary form of learning. So we recognize that for a first grader to get onto their laptop, or even if they have laptop and connectivity, the access to learning is more challenging. So we are hearing those things, and we're taking that into account, because we know that not only is it important for their students learning, but for Connecticut to reopen, we have to make sure that people are able to go to work and schools need to function. So these are all things that make the decision so difficult, but are very important to think about. And that's also part of the reason why we don't want to rush into something without having really carefully thought through the repercussions of the decisions we make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Julie, I think you're up next.
Yes, thank you. So, you know, we're talking so much about relying so much on the school schools reopening. And for many students who may have autoimmune, compromised conditions, as well as parents and or family members, or for a variety of other reasons, some parents just may be not comfortable sending their child back to school in spite of the best laid plan when school reopens. And we're hearing from a lot of parents that they're very frightened if they choose not to send their child back to school for a very legitimate reason, that there could be some repercussions. And we'd love to know how the state is maybe, viewing that possibility, which we think could happen to many, many, many people.
Sure. Thank you for that question. That's such a real scenario that many families are in. They're,
Right.
We love our children, right? That's the best thing we have, and we want to protect them. And we are all different levels of comfort with this, and we have to respect that. Many of our families who are listening today have different levels of trauma based on their experiences over the last 2 months. I know there are families that are listening who might have lost loved ones. There are families who are listening who might worry about their child's, immunocompromised situation and are less likely to feel comfortable regardless of whatever safeguards are put in place.
Right.
And we have to acknowledge that part of embracing our students and families back is accepting where they are and trying to support. And part of that is transparency in what we're trying to do and saying that these are the safeguards that we're taking and we're doing this for health and safety. We have to understand, through no fault of anyone's, we have to rebuild consumer confidence in public education. It's scary when you say, I'm going to drop my kid off and I'm going to expect that all these safeguards are in place. So we have to be very deliberate about communicating what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be doing it, sharing it with families, but also providing options for those families that may not be ready to come back or may need a different type of learning. And we are also behind the scenes trying to invest and develop programming so that a district doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. If we can put together materials and support, activities that support different standards, and we can make that available to families and districts so that they don't have to put together materials to kind of create a makeshift distance learning program that's better than what we experienced in the last 2 months. If we can do that, then we can slowly get those families to feel comfortable when they're ready to repopulate our schools 100%. But a lot of that is going to be dependent, again, on what we see with the transmission rates. And everybody talks about a second wave. A lot of families are saying, I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait to see what happens. I want to make a decision in the summer about what I'm going to do. No, for those families that are thinking that way, that we are also thinking about how we can provide education to students whose families are not ready to send them back, but also try to help build their level of confidence in our schools and help them, with that fear that they have about having their students return. Their children.
And so I'm hearing you say that there will be some sort of contingency plan for when a parent is forced to perhaps make that decision?
Yeah, we are, again, I'm not at the point now where I'm going to say this is what we're doing, and anything that I do is going to be kind of vetted through a team. But
Sure.
At this point, we're looking at, schoolhouse, what that looks like, and also what does an improved blended learning look like for families that would prefer to have all distance learning opportunities for their children. But it has to be better, as I said before. It has to be better than that quick, this is what we're doing. And unfortunately, many families don't, I get emails all the time, I would never want distance learning. And I get it, but don't forget, 24 hours, in many places they had 24 hours to figure this out. When we come in the fall, we should have a better model, and we're working really hard on that.
Thank you so much.
Great. Jeff, I think you're next.
Sure. So kind of a different question, Commissioner. Some parents are asking us and asking for guidance as to, calling this year, this academic school year, essentially a wash, right? And some parents are wanting to inquire whether or not their child, when they go back to school, regardless of the model in which they're going back, distance learning, or a hybrid learning or blended learning or whatnot, if they could simply repeat their grade. Is that possible?
So, decisions on retention are really local decisions. I can tell you my perspective as an educator about that, and I'd be happy to share that. But I want to make sure I make it clear that those aren't really decisions that, as a commissioner, I'm going to say this is what you should do. And it's individual too. I would say it's a local decision, but every child is different. My experience from being a teacher, fourth grade teacher, and a building principal in an elementary school for 10 years is that, number one, I don't believe this year was a wash. Major disruption this year. But I don't believe it was a wash. There were, the majority of the year followed normal processes. And then the final quarter of the year, things got turned upside down for everyone. So keep in mind, so if a retention took place, that child would go back to start the year with a group of students that also had 3 months of disrupted learning in the year previous. So think about they're going to be walking in and the students are going to be a year behind, plus whatever they had to make up for that, what they lost in the previous year. Socially, emotionally, kids have gone through so much over the last 3 or 4 months. So in many cases, the social emotional impact of a retention could negate whatever big gains of academic catching up. All schools have gone through the same experience. So it's natural to expect that the first part of the next year will have some level of accelerated catch up on the topics that were most important that they missed. More importantly, and I say this as a father of an 8th grader and a 10th grader, the social disconnect that would be caused as a result of that is another layer of, I don't want to overuse the word trauma, but another concern that the kids are going to be facing now that they have to make new friends, that their friends from last year are going to be in a different grade level. That can have a negative impact on what is already going to be a part of the year that's going to be a little bit trying because it's going to be different.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Andy is next.
We've heard a lot about low engagement rates, particularly in urban areas. And I've heard figures as high as a third in Waterbury of no contact with the school since March 15th. The department has put out guidance on grading, which talks about a pass-fail model. For those kids who are not engaged, either because they did not have the device and the connectivity, or because they chose not to be engaged, what's going to happen? Are they going to fail the course? If they're in high school, are they not going to have the courses, enough credits to graduate? Are they going to have to repeat the year because they did not get credit for the prior year because they were not engaged in the process? How are you handling that?
Sure. So, it's important to recognize, and that's a great question. It's important to recognize that throughout the state, I mean, I don't have to tell you the transmission rates are greater in some areas than others. And in urban areas, they're greater.
Yeah.
So I know that many of our communities where there are students who maybe don't have the luxury that my kids have of having a parent available during the day to ask questions, or the parents are working and they can't assist with some of the technology needs or with some of the basic needs. And even worse, there are so many students that are dealing with loss of life, of major disruptions in families. I know of students who have had to pack up and move because there's no one to care for them here in Connecticut. So they just packed up and left. So, when you think about Maslow's pyramid, right, you think about, for many of our learners in Connecticut, some of their basic needs have been disrupted. And they're tending to those basic needs. So I'd like to think that very few cases is it where students just said, oh, I'm not doing it. It could be that the traumas that they're experiencing or the challenges that they're having with the basic needs make logging on at a certain time or trying to get a laptop when there might be one phone in the family with a certain amount of minutes and 4 siblings sharing the same phone. These are realities for these students. So we are working really hard to try to make connectivity and acquisition of devices for students a priority. if we could, as a state, just come around that and say every middle and high schooler should have a device, right? We can address some of those issues and connectivity too. But to your point about failing, the guidance about pass-fail was really intended to make sure that we're not further penalizing students who, with the best intentions, don't have access to the support that they need to be as successful as they would be in the classroom. So for those students who, let's say, didn't complete high school, we're gonna really work hard to try to do credit recovery programming and give them an opportunity to, during their years in high school, make up for what they lost without losing ground on what they gained from September till March 17th. So we are paying particular attention to this. We don't want to compound the impact of COVID-19 on any students. We want to be respectful of the fact that in many cases, they and their families are trying to cope the best they can with this challenge that they have. And in many of our Black and brown communities, we know the death rates are higher. We know the transmission rate is higher. So in my opinion, and many of these students might be dealing with some of these factors that are affecting their lives, and they're trying to keep their head above the water, figuratively speaking. And we need to support these students, not further penalize them.
Okay.
I think I have time for one more.
Yes.
I know my answers are running a little bit long, but
That's all right. That's all right.
yeah, no.
Yeah, Jen, you're next.
Yes, so many parents are being told at the PPTs that are being held either telephonically or virtually that what's going on with the child during distance learning, whether that's progress, regression, whatever is happening, shouldn't be discussed at the PPT level. And now that we know we're on at least 3-month closure with possibly ESY being distance learning and maybe ongoing blended learning in the fall, should PPTs be discussing how the student is doing during this time period of school closure?
Why not? Any opportunity you get to talk to kids, to families, why not? So I think there's some misinformation out there, and I want to make sure that families that are listening, that you know that at the end of the day, we're all dealing with this crisis, and sometimes information might be shared and then change, like that telephone game. Listen, any opportunity you get to talk to someone that's working with your children, you should feel comfortable saying, how's it going? How is she doing? How is he doing? What's working? What's not working? How can I support my child? And here are some things that I'm noticing that you should know so that you can better support my child. I think that's important, whether it's a PPT, a regular phone call, or what a 504, like we're on the same team here. So to me, it's really important that you hear directly that PPT meetings, you don't need a PPT meeting to find out what's going on with your kid and say, hey, how can I help my kid? Or this is what I'm noticing. I want you to know this so that when you instruct my child, you're more aware of what I'm seeing. That's called good partnerships. And we want to encourage that. But if there's ever a concern and you feel like you need to talk to someone, I want to make sure that my superstar team, my team at the agency has been phenomenal. Brian Klimkowitz has been, to me, he's just doing amazing work listening. I mean, Brian meets with you regularly because we need to hear what you're hearing so that we could try to respond in real time and be more proactive. So I know that there's some workshops that were put on under the leadership of Brian Klimkowitz around special education. We want to continue those, but I want to leave a phone number with you so that if you're running into issues or you feel like you don't have a resolution to a concern, we want to make sure you're getting information from us at the State Department of Education. So the phone number for the Bureau of Special Education is 860-713-6910. So, again, we want to support, we're a service agency. We want to support our families. Don't hesitate to drop a line if things are working really well too. Because one of the things we want to do at the agency is highlight best practices to say they're doing something right. How can I highlight that district? How can I highlight that teacher practice so that teachers who are listening and looking for ideas can learn from other teachers? That's how we grow as a state, and that's how we serve your children better. So I want to thank you for letting me be on. To the parents that are watching, I wish you health. I hope your children are okay. Know that the decisions that we make as an agency are aimed at making sure we're providing the safest environment for learning. And I think I'm starting to get myself ready to communicate that whatever plan we come up with at the State Department of Education is going to be imperfect. And it's going to be not as good as what we started with in September of last year. We've all been disrupted. And it's affecting the adults that works in our schools who miss their kids too. But know that we're going to work together. We're going to do the very best we can, and we're going to continue to get better. I'll try to get as much information out as possible in a quick way. But know that at the end of the day, this is about making sure your children and our staff are safe, and that we can provide the best opportunities given the challenges that we have with COVID-19. We're going to persevere. It's going to take a little bit of time to get to where we want to be, but we're going to persevere. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Have a good night,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
You too, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara, I just wanted, because we were all typing so quickly so that our viewers could have the right number, and a few erroneous ones were typed. So the correct number for the State Department of Ed is 860-713-6910. And so that was really wonderful of him to share that their phones are open to us. So.
Yes, I think that's fantastic. I know there was another thing, Julie, we wanted to talk to him about transition, but we touched on it a little bit with Andy, so
Well,
that was great.
You know, I'm kind of feeling a little left out here because the last question was mine, and I don't get to.
I know. I'm sorry,
I
Julie.
don't know. Do you want me to address it, and we address it as a panel?
Sure, I think so. I think that's great.
Okay. So, you know, so many parents are asking us this question, and there are two areas underneath the IDEA where students can age out. Now, depending on what state you live in, those ages are different. Here in Connecticut, we have the birth to 3 system, and upon turning 3, you become eligible to transfer your
number, and a few
can age to
Okay.
if you qualify and you meet the criteria, you can transfer into an IEP and receive special education. The other area in which students age out here in Connecticut is at the age of 21, or the year in which they turn 21 years old. So if you turn 21, let's say in May, you can go through till the end of June and finish out the year, as an example. And that's called aging out. You don't get exited. That's not a decision that the PPT team makes. You actually age out. And so many parents and children and kids are in this situation where either they're in birth to 3, they've already turned 3, and there's no school to go to, and virtual learning simply is not going to work for your average 3-year-old. And then, of course, at 21, when you're transitioning into the adult world, and so many kids have lost so much opportunity that they would have had in those critical last 3 months of their high school career at 21. So can we talk about what we think, or we would certainly hope that teams would acknowledge the fact that, especially, let's start with turning 21, that perhaps kids who have lost the 3 months get to continue being eligible and get an extra 3 or an additional 3 months in lieu of the months that were not beneficial.
Let me just say that, you know, the commissioner talked about these roundtables that Brian Klimkowitz has put together, that Jen, Jeff, and I all participate in. And one of them was exactly on that issue. And there is guidance coming out on that. And my expectation is that it's going to be an individualized decision as to whether there should be some additional services. But as a general rule, kids who turn 21 in the year leading up to June 30th of 2020 are not going to get an extension of services, despite that's not what we would like to have happen, but that's what I expect the state to be saying. Do you disagree, Jen? Or
well, I'm going to try to be more hopeful that there will be some expectation that individual PPTs will make determinations in that regard, partly because, as we've talked about among us as an executive committee, you know, the students who receive services all the way up until June 30th of their 21st year are generally the most needy of our students. Mm-hmm. And those are the students that we all know from our experience with our families that we work with are the ones who are benefiting the least from distance learning. Very few of those students are really able to access distance learning. In addition, the plan for what the next step would be for these students, whether it was a particular job or type of employment, whether it was an agency that was going to take over, may look very different right now. So even just as an example, if a student's been preparing for years for particular vocation, and the training in the last year has been focusing on assisting that student in that particular job. Now that job may require masks, it may require certain kind of cleaning, it may require certain kinds of protocols that for health reasons that weren't prepared for. So I'm a little more hopeful, but I share your skepticism about it, Andy. As to the birth to 3 end of it, which is a very different analysis, one of the executive orders, if I'm not incorrect, a month or so ago from the governor, specifically extended those students who were eligible, who were turning 3 during the school closures during this time period, to continue to be eligible under the birth to 3 system. Eventually, they're going to have to be referred, and evaluations and considerations will have to be made about whether those students will be transferred to their public school district.
Right.
On the transition issue,
Yeah.
we are planning a webinar in mid-June on that subject. And it's not only going to cover this particular issue, but it's also going to cover the fact that the workforce is looking entirely different today than it looked a year ago, and the sort of transition services that need to be provided probably need to be adjusted to reflect the new sort of workforce.
Right. And, you know, not that we're not giving advice here, but if you have a student who is aging out and you do want to make the argument that you think they should get the additional 3 months,
Absolutely.
you know, be prepared to share with your team all of your concerns and specify the actual parts of the IEP that you don't think were able to be implemented, and just have, you know, a solid argument of why you believe they should. And I think that's a good starting place. And we're looking forward to the transition webinar, and we'll be letting you know when that is, and we'll have lots more to say about it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think Andy teed this up perfectly. We actually have our next webinar is tomorrow. It's tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So if you haven't signed up, you can sign up on our Facebook page. It's remarkably easy to sign up. And we have a Spanish translator, and it is a webinar about mental health, which is an incredibly important topic, even more so now. And Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because
Sure. So we have a really wonderful panel of individuals, professionals in the field from, let's see, we have Dr. Chris Bogard, who's a clinical psychologist and also runs formerly the Southfield Center. Now the name of the new program is escaping me, but he's a clinical psychologist. We have Melissa Gagne, who is both a parent, former principal and educator, and attorney, and also is trained by Yale's, their what they call their ruler training on social emotional intelligence. We have Olympia Della Flora, who is associate superintendent of the Stanford Public Schools and an incredibly dynamic speaker about school climate and things of that nature. We have Steve Hernandez, who is, Andy, to my understanding, the chair of the Social Emotional Learning Committee of the
Collaborative, but he's also the executive director of the Commission on Women, Children, and the Elderly, which is a commission established by the legislature.
Thank you. And Dawn Matera, who is the founder of the Westport Day School, which is a state-approved special education therapeutic day school. And we are talking about everything from how parents are faring during this time period. You know, Commissioner Cardona rightly pointed out how quickly teachers had to turn on a dime to become distance learning teachers, and parents have had to turn on a dime to become their kids' teachers. And for some, it's just been incredibly overwhelming. And so we want to talk about parents' mental health. We want to talk about how schools can be better suited for when they do reopen, to being sensitive to the anxiety and trauma that many students have and have become exacerbated by the school closure and the pandemic. So we have a lot of questions for the panel, and we are welcoming input and chat on our webinar, which again is free, but you do have to register.
And we'll also be talking about resources you can access. Very, very important. So again, mental health webinar tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And then we will have a transition webinar later on in June, and we will get more information about that later. So I think what we're going to do right now is we're going to do our takeaway. Are we ready? I know we had just a wonderful conversation with the Commissioner, and I'd love to, I don't know if that influences your takeaway or not, but Jeff, how about you start?
Sure. Before I do my takeaway, I've just also been noticing in the chat, for those of you that are wanting to register for tomorrow's webinar, there is definitely still time. When we get off here on our Facebook link, I will post the webinar registration page so you can register for it. Okay,
If you send me that link, I'll put it on the website too, Jeff.
will do.
And it's on our Facebook page now, but I know you're
It
watching.
is. Okay,
And,
good.
and the website being seekct.com, seekct.com.
I'd also just like to underscore that tomorrow's webinar again is being translated it's being translated into Spanish for our Spanish-speaking audience listeners. So that again is due to the thanks of the generous donations that our nonprofit is receiving. So please, if you do have some money to donate, we always are happy to accept your donations to put on these free programs. So my takeaway, we're in this for our kids, right? That's why we're all here. And one thing that I found today that I thought was rather useful is kids and quarantine fatigue. And Yale New Haven Health, which I'll post in our Facebook chat here, they're actually identifying it as fatigue with kids because essentially they're really kind of stuck inside a lot. And the whole play activities because of the virus has really taken its toll on our kids. So it does have some coping strategies into it. Certainly I'm not the clinician here, but for example, with my kids, we bought them a Facebook portal so they can now connect with their friends, even if it's just for a short amount of time through video chat. So check it out. I'll post the link, Yale New Haven Health, Kids and Quarantine Fatigue.
Nice. Julie, what's your takeaway?
Sure. Well, Dr. Cardona spoke tonight about the fact that they're really trying to put a plan together that will work for parents to go back to work. And I just know from talking to so many parents that everybody's sort of hoping, or many people are hoping, that things will go back 100% to a brick and mortar building in September. And perhaps you're making your plans with your work on that. And I would just say, if you're not already doing so, to please talk to your employer about, how your employer might be able to support you when things can go more like this versus a plan that's going to stay the same. And that's a very practical takeaway, but I can't help but thinking about the disconnect between school going back and not being the same, and then how parents are going to juggle that with their work.
Sure. Thank you, Julie. All right, Andy, let's hear your takeaway.
I'm the glass half full guy.
Really? You're kidding.
We heard great things from the commissioner. She's really got the great values, the right instincts, is looking at the right questions. But yet when the guidance comes out from the state, it doesn't seem to reflect that. It seems to reflect a much different pattern. So we've got to really support our commissioner. And so what I'd ask you to do is write letters to the governor, write letters to the commissioner, talking about the types of things that need to be done. And so we build up some political pressure to actually make the educational program successful for our kids and not merely working for the convenience of school districts and bureaucrats.
Okay. Jen.
So I have two takeaways. One is a very quick one, which is if you're going to be promoting a webinar for the next day, you should remember the name of one of your panelists' organization. But thankfully, our viewers reminded me it's Sasko River that Dr. Bogart is affiliated with.
Right.
So my apologies to Dr. Bogart for that. My takeaway is that something Dr. Cardona said that I think is so simple, it's profound, which is why not? Why not talk to your team, whether it's at a PPT or by email or phone or whatever modality works for you? Why not be communicating with them and they with you in every way that is important about how your child's doing during distance learning?
Excellent. I love it. All right. Well, I think that concludes our Seek this week. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much to Commissioner Cardona for joining us tonight. We know your time is very, very limited. You're a little busy this time of year, especially now. And just to remind you, our website is seekct.com. Gentle reminder, we are a nonprofit. We gratefully accept your donations. They go toward practical things like Spanish translators for webinars, which is happening tomorrow. So thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we will see you next week.
Babs, can I stop you before we sign off?
Yeah.
One very important question somebody just posed for Andy.
Oh my God.
What's
All right.
the contact
Breaking news.
information to write the commissioner?
Oh.
Oh, what? Well, the commissioner, I mean, if you want to write the commissioner, it's, you know, the Connecticut Department of Education, 450 Columbus Boulevard, Hartford, Connecticut, 06103. His email, let me give you his email. Just a second.
Hold on. I have it.
Miguel, MIGUEL .Cardona, CARDONA @CT.gov.
That's right.
Thank you.
But more, you know, it is also very important to write the governor. And his address is, I think, governor.cd.com. Let me see.
Let's see.
Hang tight. We're getting it.
I don't know why I'm not, it's not, oh, there it is. Lamont, I don't know. Governor.ct.com would work.
Say it again, Andy.
Governor@ct.com.
Governor@ct.com. That's pretty easy.
Governor Dedlam.
Oh, Jerry, thank you for posting it. Wonderful.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, and you know, those letters do matter.
They do. Absolutely.
And Babs, how did you get away without a takeaway?
Well,
I was
you know,
going to ask that.
I introduce it. I'm enough. That's enough.
It's good to be the king.
Exactly. My takeaway is hold on. We will be here for you. Send us a question and we will do our best to get it answered. So that's my takeaway. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.
Take care.